The sky above burned with swirling reds and purples, an aurora-like phenomenon triggered by Earth's alien spaceport activity. As the cargo doors slid open, Yara emerged. Blue-skinned woman with luminescent markings shimmering across her arms like constellations. She was no longer a free soul, handed over to a species she had only known through distant warnings. Humans. Yara's heart pounded as the airlock hissed behind her, sealing her fate. Her hands trembled in iron cuffs as two armored guards flanked her sides. The announcement had been as harsh as the sentence. Exile from her home planet, now forced into servitude on Earth. Her only remaining possession was a pendant she wore, an heirloom that once symbolized freedom among her people. Standing on the opposite side of the platform was Lieutenant Daniel Kane. He wasn't what Yara expected. Broad-shouldered but not brutish, he had sun-weathered skin, dark brown eyes full of mystery, and a weary kindness in his gaze that felt out of place given her fate. Yara. Kane's voice was calm, but his words carried the finality of her new reality. I'm here to take you in. She lowered her gaze, unwilling to reveal the swirl of emotions inside her. Fear, anger, and an odd sense of curiosity. What would become of her life now? Kane hesitated for a moment. Something about the alien woman in front of him struck him as more than a mere slave. There was a silent dignity in the way she stood, even in chains, and it unsettled him. He knew the assignment: host a prisoner from an alien world under the new interspecies agreement. But Kane hadn't expected the weight of this responsibility to feel so personal. Come on, he said, voice softening. Let's get this over with. Yara stepped forward reluctantly, her bare feet cold against the concrete platform. She felt the weight of every step, like chains dragging her further from her former life. Yet something about the man walking beside her, kindness she had not expected, made her chest tighten with conflicted emotions. Yara's journey through the human facility was a haze of confusion and unease. The walls were sterile, cold, and lined with unfamiliar machinery that hummed softly, as if the very building were alive. Lieutenant Kane walked beside her in silence, his presence both reassuring and disorienting. Yara couldn't decide whether to fear him or find solace in his quiet demeanor. They reached a room, small, minimal, with nothing but a cot and a table bolted to the floor. Kane unlocked her cuffs, his hands gentle but deliberate. Yara winced as the iron bands left red marks on her wrists. She instinctively pulled her arms close, the weight of her pendant resting heavily on her chest. This is where you'll stay, Kane said. He gave her space, moving to stand near the door. There's food and water on the table. We'll talk more tomorrow. Yara's voice cracked from disuse, but she forced herself to speak. What do you expect from me? Kane met her gaze, his eyes steady. I expect nothing, Yara. The law requires you to serve, but I don't want this to be what they told you it would be. She stared at him, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. Was this pity, compassion, or was he simply another human who would exploit her under the guise of kindness? You think you're different from the others, Yara whispered bitterly, testing him. But a cage with soft walls is still a cage. Kane didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a tired sigh as if her words confirmed something he already knew. You're right, he admitted quietly, but I'll try to make it less unbearable. Yara was taken aback by the honesty in his response. It wasn't what she expected. She had braced herself for cruelty or manipulation. But this man was neither harsh nor condescending. It left her feeling more vulnerable than she had anticipated. For the next few days, a routine began to take shape. Kane visited her every morning, bringing fresh meals and occasionally offering small comforts. Blanket, a book, or moments of conversation. He asked her questions, not about her crimes, but about her homeworld, her people, and the customs she missed most. At first, Yara was reluctant to answer. Trust was dangerous, especially with humans. But Kane was patient. He never pressed when she remained silent, And slowly, Yara found herself talking. She told him about the twin moons of her planet, the blossom festivals, and the dances her sister performed in honor of the changing seasons. She spoke of things she thought she had buried deep within her heart, and it surprised her how much it hurt to remember. Cain listened without judgment, as if every word she shared was a gift he didn't take for granted. It was the first time in weeks that Yara felt seen, as more than just a prisoner, but as a person with a past worth knowing. One evening, Cain returned with something unexpected, a small potted flower. Its petals glowed faintly in the dim light, reminding Yara of the flora that grew back home. She stared at it, in disbelief, her chest tightening with emotions she couldn't name. "It's not the same as the ones from your planet," Cain said, setting the flower on the table. "But it's close. Thought you might like it." Yara touched the petals gently, as if the fragile blossom might vanish at any moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cain shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I just don't believe in making life harder than it already is." For the first time since her arrival, Yara felt something unexpected: hope. It was small and fragile, like the flower in front of her, but it was there, a flicker of light in the darkness that had consumed her. As Cain stood to leave, Yara stopped him with a soft question. "Daniel, why do you care?" He paused at the door, glancing back at her. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel trapped," he said quietly, before walking away. Days blurred into weeks, and an unspoken understanding began to grow between Yara and Cain. Their interactions, initially bound by obligation, slowly evolved into something more nuanced. Cain no longer visited her just to deliver food or check on her well-being. He stayed to talk, to listen. In those moments, the walls between captor and captive began to crumble, brick by brick. Yara still carried the weight of her exile, but Cain's presence gave her moments of relief from the loneliness gnawing at her soul. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, even as she reminded herself that hope was dangerous. The fear of betrayal, of her budding trust being shattered, lingered like a shadow in the back of her mind. One evening, after a particularly long day, Cain leaned back in the chair by the table and rubbed his temples. His military uniform looked disheveled, his usually composed demeanor fraying at the edges. Yara noticed the exhaustion etched into his features. "You look tired," she said softly, surprising even herself with the gentle concern in her voice. Cain let out a weary chuckle. "It's been a long day." Yara hesitated before asking the question that had been on her mind for days. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? Treating me like I matter?" He met her gaze, the weight of her words settling between them. For a long moment he said nothing, as if trying to find the right way to respond. "Because you do matter," he said finally. "I don't care what they say you've done. No one deserves to be treated like they're nothing." The sincerity in his voice caught Yara off guard, and for a moment, she felt a warmth she hadn't experienced since her exile. It was a fleeting sensation, like the glow of her homeworld's twin moons, beautiful yet fragile. As the nights grew longer, their conversations ventured deeper into the pasts they had both buried. Cain spoke of his military tours, the battles fought, and the lives lost, stories he had never shared with anyone. There was a quiet sorrow in his voice, a grief that resonated with Yara's own. "I didn't sign up for this," Cain admitted one evening, his gaze distant. "I thought I was protecting people, but somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what that even meant." Yara listened, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She understood what it was like to feel lost, to be cast out, and forced to rebuild oneself from the shattered pieces of a former life. "You're not the only one who lost something," Yara whispered, her voice filled with quiet pain. "I didn't just lose my freedom when they exiled me. I lost my family, my purpose, everything that made me who I was." Their shared sorrow hung between them, a fragile connection forged in the space where their pain overlapped. For the first time, Yara realized that Cain was as much a prisoner as she was, trapped by duty, guilt, and the expectations of a world that had taken more from him than it had ever given. The turning point came on a night when a storm raged outside, heavy rain drumming against the windows like the rhythm of a distant war drum. Yara sat by the small window in her room, watching the downpour with a mix of longing and sadness. Rainstorms reminded her of home, where rain was seen as a blessing, a promise of renewal and hope. Cain knocked lightly on the door before entering, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. He handed one to Yara, who accepted it with a small nod of gratitude. "Thought you might want something warm," he said, sitting across from her. They sipped their tea in comfortable silence, the sound of the storm filling the room. After a while, Cain broke the silence with a question that caught Yara off guard. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them? Your people, I mean." Yara stared into her cup, the steam curling upward like ghostly memories. "I don't know," she admitted. "How do you forgive those who took everything from you?" Cain nodded, as if he understood. "You don't have to forgive them," he said quietly. "Sometimes, it's enough just to survive." His words struck a chord deep within Yara. Survival. It was all she had left, but maybe, just maybe, survival didn't have to be a lonely road. Days stretched into weeks, and what had begun as mere conversations turned into something deeper. Yara and Cain fell into a rhythm, an unspoken understanding that neither had expected. Cain no longer saw her as a prisoner, and Yara, despite her resistance, could no longer deny that she felt safer in his presence than she thought possible. One evening, Cain returned from a long patrol, his uniform damp from the persistent autumn drizzle outside. Yara glanced up as he entered, noticing the fatigue etched into his features. Without thinking, she reached out and placed a hand over his wrist. "You need rest, Daniel," she said, her voice soft. Cain's breath hitched at the touch, not because of fear, but because it was the first time Yara had willingly reached out to him. He gave her a small, tired smile. "And miss your stellar company." "Not a chance." Yara rolled her eyes, but there was no real annoyance in her expression. It was a small, shared moment, one that spoke of comfort and familiarity. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of their evening talks. Yara sat cross-legged on the floor, attempting to describe one of the more humorous rituals from her homeworld. "So," she explained, "we dance backward in a circle to confuse the spirits of misfortune. And then we throw fruit at each other. It's all about balance, chaos and joy in equal measure." Cain chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that filled the small room. "You're telling me that the key to happiness on your planet is dodging flying fruit?" Yara grinned, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Not dodging, getting hit. If the fruit sticks to you, it means good luck." Cain laughed harder, and to her surprise, Yara found herself laughing too. It was the first time she had truly laughed since her exile. A moment of lightness in a life weighed down by sorrow. In that instant, the barriers between them crumbled entirely. They were no longer alien and human, prisoner and captor. They were just 2 souls, bound by the strange and unpredictable currents of life, finding solace in each other's presence. Later that night, as the storm outside settled into a gentle drizzle, Cain leaned back in his chair and gave Yara a thoughtful look. "You know, I think you'd like Earth if you gave it a chance." Yara arched an eyebrow. "Is that an invitation?" "Maybe," Cain said with a grin. "Once the military stops breathing down my neck, I'll take you out to see more than just this room." The idea of freedom, of stepping outside without fear, stirred something in Yara's heart. She wasn't ready to hope, not yet, but the thought was there, lingering at the edges of her mind like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Yara studied Cain's face, searching for any sign that his words were just empty promises. But all she saw was honesty, an openness that disarmed her more than any weapon could. "I might take you up on that," she said quietly, her voice laced with cautious hope. Kane's smile was small but genuine, and in that moment, Yara felt something shift within her. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was the start of something, a fragile connection that had the potential to grow into something far more powerful than either of them had imagined. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Yara and Kane grew more complicated. What had begun as mutual understanding was evolving into something far more intimate. The unspoken connection between them grew with every shared moment. A glance that lingered too long, a touch that meant more than either dared admit. But both knew the weight of the world outside their small room. Kane's position as a lieutenant meant that any misstep with Yara could result in severe punishment, not only for her but for him as well. And Yara, still shackled by her exile, was haunted by the knowledge that this fragile peace could be shattered at any moment. Yet despite the risks, neither could ignore the pull that brought them closer with each passing day. One cold evening, Kane found Yara sitting near the window, lost in thought as she traced patterns on the glass with her finger. She didn't turn when he entered, but she knew it was him. The warmth of his presence was unmistakable. "You okay?" Kane asked, his voice laced with concern. Yara gave a small shrug. "I don't know what okay feels like anymore." Kane stepped closer, standing beside her. "Maybe it's not about being okay. Maybe it's about finding moments that feel a little less heavy." Yara glanced up at him, her silver eyes filled with emotions she struggled to contain. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for his hand. Kane didn't pull away. Instead, he intertwined his fingers with hers, a gesture so simple, yet so profound. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything they couldn't say hanging in the air between them. It was a moment of trust, promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their fragile peace was interrupted the next morning by the arrival of Commander Grayson, Kane's superior officer. Grayson's sharp gaze swept over Yara with a mixture of suspicion and disdain, as though she were nothing more than a nuisance. "How's the alien adjusting?" Grayson asked Kane, his tone dismissive. Kane kept his expression neutral. "She's adapting. No trouble so far." Grayson narrowed his eyes. "Good, because if she steps out of line, I won't hesitate to send her to the camps. The council might want cooperation, but we're not running a charity here." Yara remained silent, her heart pounding as she fought the urge to react. Kane gave her a subtle glance, silently urging her to stay calm. After a tense exchange, Grayson left, but his words lingered like a storm cloud over the room. Kane ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched into his features. "I hate that man." Yara exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. "He would have me killed if he could. Not if I have anything to say about it," Kane said firmly. Yara looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, a fire that both frightened and comforted her. That night, Yara lay awake on the small cot, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. Grayson's visit had shattered the illusion of safety she had allowed herself to believe in, reminding her that the world outside Kane's kindness was still cold and unforgiving. Kane sat on the edge of her cot, his presence a quiet reassurance in the darkness. "I won't let anything happen to you, Yara," he whispered, his voice steady and sure. Yara turned to face him, the weight of his words settling over her like a warm blanket. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much?" Kane hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Because you matter to me, Yara, more than you know." In that moment, Yara felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close, something that gave her hope, even in the darkest of nights. And for the first time since her exile, Yara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The delicate bond between Kane and Yara continued to grow, but with it came greater risks. The unspoken attraction between them had become impossible to ignore, yet both understood the dangers of crossing the invisible line that separated duty from desire. Kane's every interaction with Yara carried the weight of his military oath, and Yara's fate still hung precariously in the hands of humans who saw her as nothing more than a slave. Despite knowing better, they found themselves drawn deeper into a connection that neither could resist. The quiet moments they shared felt like stolen fragments of a life neither had dared hope for. A life free of rules and expectations. But the world around them was not kind to such dreams. The fragile peace they had built came crashing down one fateful morning. Kane was summoned to an emergency meeting with Commander Grayson and the Council. When he returned hours later, his expression was grim, his jaw clenched with suppressed anger. "They're transferring you," Kane said, his voice tight with frustration. "They think you're a liability. You'll be sent to a high-security facility by the end of the week." Yara's stomach dropped. "Prison," she whispered, the weight of the word suffocating her. Kane nodded, his fists clenched at his sides. "They're afraid you're getting too comfortable here. Grayson suspects there's more between us than there should be." The air between them thickened with unspoken tension. Yara knew what this meant. Her time with Kane was running out. Whatever fragile connection they had built was about to be torn apart, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "Is there any way to stop this?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Kane's gaze darkened. "I'll find a way. I promise." But they both knew how dangerous it was to make promises in a world like this. That night, Kane sat by Yara's side, a quiet determination etched into his features. "There's a way out," he said softly. "It's risky, but it's the only way to keep you safe." Yara narrowed her eyes. "What are you suggesting?" Kane hesitated for a moment, as if weighing the consequences of what he was about to say. "We leave. Together." Yara's breath caught in her throat. "You'd risk everything. For me?" Kane nodded, his expression unwavering. "I won't let them take you away, Yara. Not like this." It was a dangerous plan, one that could cost Kane everything. But the alternative was unthinkable. Yara knew that if she was transferred, she would never see Kane again. And more than that, she would lose the only person who had ever made her feel like more than a prisoner. The following days were a blur of preparation. Kane used every resource at his disposal to arrange their escape: an unauthorized transport ship, falsified documents, and just enough supplies to get them off-world. Every step was a gamble, every decision fraught with peril. On the night of their escape, Kane led Yara through the dimly lit corridors of the base, his hand gripping hers tightly. Alarms could go off at any moment, and the risk of being caught loomed over them like a dark cloud. Yara's heart pounded as they reached the hangar where the transport ship waited. Freedom was within reach, but the weight of what they were leaving behind pressed heavily on her chest. She knew that Kane was risking everything: his career, his freedom, his future. As they boarded the ship, Yara glanced back one last time at the facility that had been both her prison and her sanctuary. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, knowing that once they left, there would be no turning back. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off, carrying them away from the life they had known and into the uncertain future that awaited them. Yara's heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The transport ship shot through the atmosphere, leaving Earth behind as stars filled the vast expanse of space. Kane sat beside Yara in the cockpit, his hand steady on the controls even as his heart raced. They had done it. They were free, for now. But freedom came with a price, and they both knew the danger was far from over. Yara stared out at the stars, her breath shallow as the reality of their situation sank in. She had spent months as a prisoner, believing that the remnants of her life would be reduced to survival. And yet here she was, sitting beside a human who had risked everything for her. A man she now knew she couldn't imagine life without. "We did it," she whispered, as if saying the words would make them real. Kane glanced over at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We did." For the first time since her exile, Yara felt the weight of hope pressing against her chest, not the fragile flicker she had clung to before, but a full and radiant light, like the twin moons of her homeworld rising over the horizon. With Earth behind them, Kane charted a course toward the outer colonies, far enough to keep them off the radar, but close enough to civilization that they wouldn't be entirely isolated. They would have to lie low, build new identities, and start fresh. The idea of starting over was both terrifying and exhilarating. Yara had never imagined a future beyond her servitude, and now the possibilities stretched before her like an uncharted galaxy. "What will we do?" she asked, turning to Kane. He shrugged, a playful glint in his eyes. "I hear farming is peaceful. Maybe we'll grow space potatoes." Yara laughed, really laughed, for the first time since her exile. "You, a farmer?" Kane grinned. "Hey, stranger things have happened." The moment felt light and easy, like a glimpse of the life they could build together. For a brief moment, the weight of their pasts slipped away, leaving only the promise of what could be. Days turned into weeks as they drifted through space, evading patrols and crossing into neutral zones. The journey was long and exhausting, but neither of them minded. Every day brought them closer to a new life, and every shared moment strengthened the bond between them. One quiet evening, as the ship drifted through a field of shimmering nebulae, Kane sat beside Yara, his hand resting gently over hers. "I never thought I'd say this," he murmured, "but I think I found where I belong." Yara looked at him, her heart swelling with emotions too big to contain. "Me too." There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just two souls, finally free from the chains of their pasts, choosing each other against all odds. The journey wasn't without its challenges. There were close calls with patrols, tense moments when supplies ran low, and nights when the weight of their decisions felt unbearable. But through it all, they had each other, and that was enough. One night, as they approached the edge of a neutral colony, Kane pulled a small object from his pocket, a simple metal band, worn and scratched from years of use. "It's not much," he said, handing it to Yara, "but I thought, maybe you'd like to have it." Yara turned the band over in her hands, her throat tight with emotion. It wasn't just a ring, it was a promise. A promise that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Without hesitation, Yara slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect." Kane smiled, his hand finding hers. "So, does this mean we're married now?" Yara laughed, her heart full for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I guess it does." They settled on a small moon orbiting a distant planet, far from the reach of any government or military. Life wasn't easy, but it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Together, they built a home, planting roots in a place where the past no longer mattered. Every day was a new adventure, exploring the forests that stretched beyond their home, learning new skills, and finding joy in the smallest moments. And with every passing day, their bond grew stronger, forged in the fire of all they had endured. Kane and Yara knew that the universe was vast and unpredictable, full of dangers and uncertainties. But they also knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side. Because love, they had discovered, wasn't bound by rules or expectations. It wasn't limited by species or distance or the circumstances of their pasts. It was, quite simply, the most powerful force in the universe.